up, guys? Welcome back to the library in episode 2 of the Professor Bourbon Podcast. What's going on, Professor Bourbon? How are we doing tonight?
Doing very well, thank you. Sipping a little Maker's Mark Private Select toasted marshmallow.
Very nice. Get right into it and see what's in the glass tonight. You said that's a Maker's Mark store pick, is that right?
I believe this is a Private Select, and I think the toasted marshmallow I actually got when we were in Loretto. I believe I actually got this one.
Oh, nice. You got that one
Maker's
straight
Mark.
from Makers?
I believe so. That's my recollection.
Very nice. Very nice. I also have a Maker's Mark store pick private selection in my glass. This one is from Mink's store here in Atlanta, Georgia, and it is phenomenal. But the one that Professor Bourbon has in his glass is one of my favorite that I've ever tasted from straight there from Maker's Mark. So if you can go into a little more detail, I know you know about it. How do they differ kind of from other store picks there at Maker's Mark, Tony?
Well, I'll give you a couple of stories. One is, you may not know this because you guys are young bucks, and I had some fun with some of my students in class today talking about all the kind of cultural references they didn't know. So one of them was, and this is the ADHD part of all of this mess, is, do you know Tennessee Ernie Ford loads 16 tons? What do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call, because I can't go. I owe my soul to the company stove. That's a cool song. Look that one up, and it's an old song sung about mining town or coal mining towns in West Virginia, and the idea of the company store and workers getting paid in script and then having to buy all of their provisions at the company store. So the idea is, again, load 16 tons, right? You're working for the coal mine. What do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. And so with St. Peter calls him, he can't go to heaven because he owes his soul to the company store, right? So it's a song from Tennessee Ernie Ford in the 1930s song. So I was teasing my students because they didn't know about that. So I'll tease you. I can't tease you because you don't know about that, but I will. But Maker's Mark at one point in time is kind of part of the credit for saving bourbon. I don't know if you knew that. There's a famous advertisement from Maker's Mark from back in the 70s when white liquor, clear liquor, was taking over vodka and that sort of stuff. And Maker's Mark was holding down the bourbon market, and they had an advertisement that said, "Taste expensive," and it is. And it's the same. If you look at the ad, I had pulled up a picture of it. If the producer could pull up a picture, stick it in the link of the old ad, it's the bottle's exactly the same, the label's the same, everything. And way down on the bottom, even then, I think it was in like 1974, it said, also available in 101 proof special edition or special limited edition. So Maker's Mark is part of the guys that actually kind of kept bourbon going in the 70s when clear liquor was all the rage, and brown liquor was whiskey in general and bourbon in particular were falling off. Sales were falling a lot in the late 60s through the middle 70s in bourbon in the U.S. That and Blanton's that the Japanese bought up like it was going out of style. And those are basically two places that are kind of credited with keeping bourbon alive. And the 1970s when the craze of clear liquor was upon us.
Very nice. And I know that these store picks are kind of unique in the sense that opposed to a lot of the other distilleries, that if you get a store pick, you kind of go choose from, just specific barrels. You'll taste out of, 3 or 4 barrels, decide on the one you like. Whereas Maker's Mark is more of a unique situation where you go in there and all of the products start the same. And then, correct me if I'm wrong, but at Maker's, I believe you pick out 10 finishing staves. So once you pick out your single barrel, which Maker's rotates their barrels in the rick house, which we'll get to in a later episode, one of the few people that do that. So they have a very consistent product. So the way that theirs become unique store picks is they put 10 finishing staves in the barrel. And I can't remember how long they let it age and finish with those staves inside. but it gives those 10 staves, I think, give it a unique profile that no other single barrel will have.
So you're right, and they age it for 9 weeks. And so you can pick a combination of those staves and put them together, and it ages for an additional 9 weeks. They open up the barrel and stick the staves in there, and the staves come from different kinds of wood typically.
Which is really cool because everything kind of works as a proprietary blend because they won't allow two stores to get the same combination of staves. So each store pick that you get from makers is a unique store pick and a unique taste that they'll never produce again. Is that correct?
That's how I understand.
I think I have about 3 or 4 here at the house right now as well, and they all are really good pours. So that's going to be one of the segments we do here on the podcast. We're going to do every week, what's in the glass to kind of get us started, to let you guys know what we're sipping on during the episodes. And then we're going to also have some other stuff we're going to play around with. I'm sure some will work, some won't. We'll be taking some in and pushing some out. But another one that we're planning on doing is a little one we're calling the Scouting Report. As we mentioned in episode 1, Professor Bourbon's up in an ABC state. So unfortunately, his options are somewhat limited as far as releases and what's available and being able to walk in and kind of being surprised. Whereas us being down here in the state of Georgia are allowed to have private liquor stores. And so you never know what you're going to find whenever you walk into one. So I am the eyes and ears down here in the South for Professor Bourbon. So each week we might dive into what bourbons we have found. And so if you look over my shoulder right here, we have our scouting report from the week. I'm going to get a little bit of help over here from the class. She's going to kind of present some so we can let you know what we got. First, Mr. Elmer T. Lee. Professor Bourbon, I'll let you talk just a little bit about each one. But the first one we got this week, definitely a little bit of a unicorn for a lot of people, is Buffalo Trace's own Elmer T. Lee.
So the Elmer T. Lee is interesting because it wasn't one I had really planned on obtaining, but I have a friend from Nashville I'd seen in Charlotte, North Carolina, in earlier this month, a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about bourbon, and I showed him the library and invited him over, and he was gung-ho for that and asked me if I had any Elmer T. Lee, and I said I did have a bottle. It's back over here somewhere. And he said, man, that's my jam. I would mortgage my house for that. And I said, well, hang on a minute. Let me see what I can do for you. So I text the scout, and I said, I got a friend here from Nashville that would like to buy looking for an Elmer T. Lee. You think you could find one? And he's willing to mortgage the house. So the scout comes up, and 5 minutes later shoots back, I got your bottle at this price. So I tell my buddy, I got a bottle at this price. He's like, well, I'm going to Frankfurt on Tuesday, and maybe I could get one, so we got to hold off for a minute. I was like, this is what happens when you play in the big leagues with a big league scout like I have. We don't, you want something, we're going to get it. So he actually, God bless him, because he's from Cleveland, Tennessee, as they say over there, and he could turn on the charm, went up to Frankfurt, said, you got any Elmer T. Lee? And they told him no, and he gave him the big doe-eyed, thick country Tennessee accent and got himself a bottle of Elmer T. Lee at MSRP from the Buffalo Trace Distillery, which was his good fortune and to some degree now my good fortune because I have a bottle of Elmer T. Lee. And I hadn't had mine in a little bit and poured it back in, and it was better than I remembered. And I don't know if it's everything that it was advertised, but it's pretty daggone good.
Yeah, that's definitely one that I see a lot of people talk about, and some different opinions depending on what price you get it at, but definitely one of those bottles that a lot of people are looking for. Next bottle coming in here, Kings County Straight Bourbon Whiskey. This is one that I had not heard of that you were looking for. So what you got on this one, Professor?
Kings County, I think I'm trying to remember where that's from. I wanna say it's now my head just it went out of this. The other part you should know is don't get old because you forget stuff like that's not written down. So
I think it's New York.
That's what I was going to say. I think it's New York. And sourced from and New York does it, and the reviews are pretty good on it. So I'd heard really good things. I hadn't tried it, so while he was out hunting liquor, beating the bushes, as they say, he saw that, sitting on a shelf all by itself at a good price. So I said, let's add that one to the collection, and we'll let you know I think we're going to get together in a few weeks here, about 6 or 8 weeks, and we'll have that one, and we'll definitely let you know what it's like when we open it up, and we'll do a little opening on the TikTok and let you see that bottle, and then we'll give you some tasting notes, and we'll give it a grade, and we'll talk a little bit about the grading system here in a minute.
Yeah, maybe we'll go back and do like a progress report whenever I'm up there in Virginia, and we can taste some of these that we get during the scouting reports. We can go back and update, kind of let people know what we think on them. But next one I got here, this one I have heard of, Green River Weeded. Yeah, you had mentioned if I see one to go and pick it up for you again. Don't know a lot about it. Have heard of this one, but what you got for me, Professor?
The Green River just became available in the beautiful ABC state of the Commonwealth of Virginia, but the weeded is really hard to come by, and I have the Green River, which is pretty good. And so I read and heard really good things about the weeded being a little, weeded not having that spice in it from the rye, and I think that's a really good price, and so we ended up getting that, and I believe I'm trying to remember the distillery. I'm still like all of us here, still learning. I want to say that's from Tennessee, right? Just south of Nashville. Is that right?
Owensboro, Kentucky.
Kentucky. I was thinking about the other. Yeah, Owensboro, Kentucky. Southwestern Kentucky, yeah, I believe.
So looking forward to trying that one as well. Next, we have one that's going to be a little more popular that people have heard of. Good old Elijah Craig barrel proof. This one is the B523 batch. I know that Professor Bourbon likes to collect each year's full lineup for the barrel proofs. He did not have the B523, so he had asked me to be looking for this. So what you got for me on these Elijah Craig barrel proofs?
Oh, it is quickly becoming my favorite. My favorite, when people ask me, I never know what my favorite is, but I don't know that I ever take Elijah Craig barrel proofs off the short list. And we in the Scout had found the C923 for me, and we were so hell-bent on finding a C923. I thought I had the B523, and when he got here and we looked at the card catalog from the library, realized there's a hole there, because for good luck in the last 2 years, I have the both Larceny and Elijah Craig, the 123, the 523, the 923, the 122, the 522, and the 922, and then I have some things back from there. I also have an Elijah Craig barrel. I think they call it Y922, and that's your own bottle 922. We visited when we visited the Heaven Hill Distillery. We got to bottle our own bottle of Elijah Craig, and that's really good too. But the 523, I'm looking forward to trying it. The 923, of course, everybody has off the charts, and it's incredibly good. And you might not know this. There's a little controversy about the laser etchings on the bottle, and this went back and forth with the Mash and Drum podcast, and they went back and forth on that, trying to claim that there was a difference in the taste, and if you want to see that, you can look at Mash and Drum, and some other people have picked it up, but that's, let those guys handle that kind of stuff and look for laser etchings on bottles. My eyes can't tell whether I got an A22 or an A23, so it's all the same.
Yeah, these Elijah Craig barrel proofs, a lot of people rave about. I know both of us really enjoy them. Mr. Proof, a guy we're going to try to have on the podcast at some point, swears by him. He's always after some of the older bottles, the 17, 18s, and 19s. So really good product there. Looking forward to trying that one next time I'm up there with you as well. And the last one that we got this week on the scouting report is this Holiday Soft Red Wheat, and it's the Bottled in Bond. Another one of these that I don't know anything about. Professor Bourbon asked me to keep an eye out for it. Sure enough, I walked into my local liquor store. One was sitting on the shelf. So we're going to give it a shot. So what do you have on the Holiday, that Bottled in Bond here? Of
the people who are ranking things at the end of the year, which I don't think we'll ever do, because I don't think we can be in the same class as the guys that are ranking these, the Fred Minnicks, the Bourbon Junkies, the It's Bourbon Night, the Mash and Drums, those guys, they're the experts. We're just kind of picking up, in the rear here, talking about slightly different stuff, but they are that shows up really well on lots of people's lists. Nobody's beating the doors down to get it, but everybody says, man, this stuff is really, really good. So I thought I'd keep an eye out for it and see what happens.
Nice. I feel like you can find a lot of good bourbons kind of going that route and just trying to pick up stuff that have good reputations that aren't necessarily allocated. You can find on shelves and things like that. So with your rating scale, I know we're talking about quality and things like that, and tasting and, Fred Minnick and those kind of guys. And I know that they're very particular about their rating scales. So for Professor Bourbon, do you have a general rating scale that you kind of stick to whenever you're tasting bourbon? Or is it kind of like, I like this, I don't like this, this is hot, this is not hot? How does Professor Bourbon like to rank his?
That's a great question. There's all sorts of scales, the 1 to 100, the 1 to 5, the 1 to 4, I'm a professor, so we grade things A, B, C, D, F, or we could go pass, fail. So I guess the first round, you look at something, you try it the first time, maybe it gets a pass, fail. Am I going to drink this again or recommend it to somebody? And but if we get a little more serious, we go A, B, C, D, F, and everybody knows what an F is if you're in college, right? On a their famous 4.0 scale, or in high school or whatever. An F's an F, and F means oh boy, that's not good. And one of the things I tease my students about, because I live in the South and I grew up in the Northeast, is I tease them about what I call the triangle of mediocrity. And this is going to make a lot of people mad. So, buckle in and get ready there, Buttercup. The triangle of mediocrity is ranch dressing, country music, and light beer. And what I mean by mediocrity is that
you're 2/3 correct. You're 2/3 correct. Yeah.
There's nobody in the world, if they come to your house and say, "Could I have a beer?" and you go, "I just got light beer," is going to go, "Oh no, don't give me that." Right? So it's like, if you said, "Hey, all I got in my fridge is this dark hollow porter aged in bourbon barrels," he's going to go, "You got any water?" And if I say, he says, "You got any salad dressing?" and I go, all I got is blue cheese," he's probably going to go, do you have a piece of, an apple or something? And if you, so when I say mediocrity, it's this great idea that, nobody's really going to be upset by it. Nobody's really going to be mad at you if you give it to him. Nobody's going to be sad if he doesn't have it. So then I add in there country music to the whole thing, which just shoots right in the middle. I always tease my students about this because they're all from the South, and it's a lot of fun. Is that country music is a reward in mediocrity. Hey, I got up today. Hooray for me. I went to work today. Hooray for me. It's Friday. I'm going to get in a truck and drink beer
in my truck. Hooray for me.
Drink beer in my truck. Hooray for me. I made it. I made it all the way to the weekend. Hooray for me. And the next time there's a metaphor, let me know, because it'll be the first time. So on the other end, the opening of this is jazz. I'm pretty sure if you like jazz and I ask you, do you want a porter or a light beer, you're going to pick the porter. I'm pretty sure if you like jazz, you ain't putting ranch on your pizza. So for me, an F is like ranch on pizza. Like the other thing I tease people about is ranch is like adult ketchup. It's what you put on food for the same reason kids put on it. They don't really like the taste of the food, but they like the taste of ketchup. So put it on your food, and everything tastes like ranch. So if you got to make a Southern or eat a piece
of bourbon, very wrong.
And if you want to get Andrew to eat a piece of celery, dip it in some ranch.
That's right. That part is right. If you want me to eat a vegetable, just drown it in ranch, and I'm all about it.
And there you have it. So next time you're in New York City, why don't you head over to a pizzeria and ask them if you can have some ranch dressing with a slice?
No, I don't have the confidence to do that, so I'll pass on that.
So that and And so when you
All right,
get
so if that's the bottom of the barrel, what's the top? What's the top?
an A, that's like listening to Miles Davis and in a nice, cool, calm room, sitting in an easy chair like this with a fire going in front of you and sipping whatever your favorite bourbon of the day is. That's an A right there. Miles Davis, a fire, a wingback chair, leather wingback chair, and a good glass of bourbon. That's an A. Miles Davis.
All right. Well, how about you give me a bourbon that's a ranch on a pizza bourbon, and then you give me a bourbon that's a Miles Davis in your library with the fire going bourbon. How about let me get two examples. Not necessarily throwing someone under the bus for the ranch on the pizza, but just doesn't do it for Professor Bourbon.
No, and it's always because everybody knows this, and there's lots of other podcasts and YouTube channels that talk about this. Is what's your favorite bourbon? What's the best bourbon? The one you like, the way you like to drink it. So we're not necessarily. These are things that I don't necessarily like, but for me, the winner is Bare Knuckle from their distillery in Virginia is escaping right now, but it's called Bare Knuckle. It's on the bottom over here. You can't see it hidden in the back. I one time cooked with some Brussels sprouts and bourbon and bacon with it, and everybody in the house really liked the Brussels sprouts the way we cook them, fry them up, pan fry them up, put a bacon in there. And Drew, you know this. Who doesn't like bacon on stuff? It's like the second version of ranch dressing, only it tastes good. Right? There's nothing bad with bacon. And so we made up these Brussels sprouts, cooked them all up. I poured that Bare Knuckle bourbon in there, and nobody would eat the damn Brussels sprouts. So if you're talking about that, I think Bare Knuckle.
It's that bad. It can't even.
Bare Knuckle, I think, was that. I don't know. I don't know. There's an age statement on it because I don't think if you just pour it in one end of the oak barrel and out the other, I don't think you can give it an age statement. But it does qualify as bourbon when you do that. So that would be my. Now I've had some that.
That's ranch on a pizza.
Yeah, I've had some that are pushing that, but I understand they've made some other things that are aged a little bit longer that are supposed to be pretty good. I haven't gone over there yet. So, on the other end right now, I mean,
what makes Professor? Yeah, what makes you think Miles Davis?
What makes me think Miles Davis, a wingback chair and a fireplace? I would say now, we talked about it earlier, it's probably an Elijah Craig C923, or I tried again today for the first time since we did our tastings, the Mighty Fine Batch from Booker's. Oh boy, I really enjoyed that. Oh, yeah. So that's pushing up there in the A category or superior. So there's not too many things up there, just as there's not too many Fs, right? It's hard to make, and even then, if you really pushed me on the Bare Knuckle, I'd probably give it a D-, but because it is bourbon.
Right, and I feel like there's been many times that you and I have been tasting bourbons, either doing blind tastings or knowing what we're tasting, where you'll taste something initially, and you revisit it maybe 30 minutes later or after you've had a couple glasses of bourbon and that one's been sitting on the side, and all of a sudden you give that, this one's growing on me. Yeah. That's your favorite phrase for whenever we're sipping on bourbon. For one that you didn't like at first, you go, oh, this one, I don't know. This one's growing on me. I think I like this one better. This one went from waffles at the Hampton Inn to maybe a nice steak walking into a steak restaurant.
Yeah, I go along with that, and what we're sipping on right here, this Maker's Mark, this is going to show up in a B somewhere and going to be well above average, going to be, good, but not excellent and not great, pushing on that border. It's up there in the high B, maybe B+ range, which would be, a nice pasta carbonara, homemade, where the class helps me make the pasta, run it through the thing, get the noodles just right, and cook it all up and toss it in a bowl and have the family around the big island in the living room. That's probably, that's this one right here, I'd say.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I have this one in the low Bs, the particular store pick I have. There's been some that have crept into that middle B range, but definitely not something I would put into the Miles Davis category. I don't think.
So we could
But
go.
it sounds like you kind of have a general instead of being. Go ahead.
I was going to say, when you do this too, we can finite a little bit. You could have A and A minus and B plus and B minus, and then when you get in C, if you get into like C, a middle C, C minus, that's like you show up at the bar and your friends are drinking bourbon. They go, "You want something?" And he orders it, and you're like, "Well, all they got is that. I don't know. It's above. It's not quite rail, and we won't tease anybody we know named Dylan about his choice in bourbon, but that's probably that C minus range where you're like, all right, if you make me, I'll drink it. I won't fuss about it, not publicly, but I'll drink it. So that, a C minus is I won't fuss about it and I'll drink it. And then if you get a D, it's like, well, yeah, this is bourbon, but I don't bring me that one again. Maybe we should try to give this to our neighbor and hope he likes it. A D would be like, yeah, I'll finish this one, but don't ask me to do it again. A C would be, yeah, I don't mind drinking this in a big giant group where I don't really have a nice glass to drink it out of, right? And then we get to B's and A's, C pluses and B minuses, B's and A's, and we're in a different category. That's the stuff you really want to sip.
Yeah, I like that, and I think it works well. Obviously, as you being a professor, kind of having a grading scale on that level instead of I give this a 5.2. Maybe it's a 5.3. That's such a random. And whoever have you listened to that does those kind of scales? It's like I'm gonna give this a 2.7. Usually It starts if you have a 1 to 10 scale like that, they end up starting at 5. Really.
Yeah.
They don't put anything below 5. So having that kind of like an A through F grading scale, like you're familiar with in school, I think that's a lot more telling and a lot less specific, which is kind of nice for the audience as well.
And another way to think about an F2 is if you were in the library and wanted that, I'd probably go, let me see if we can't find you something else. Right? That'd be the F.
I'll hang out in that family, but
yeah, let me see if we can find you something else.
So another segment we're going to try out on the Professor Bourbon Podcast. We're going to see what has the professor been reading this week. I know Professor Bourbon likes to read a lot of news articles, likes to listen to his podcast on bourbon. He stays far more informed than I do. So we'd like to just pick your brain a little bit and see if there's anything interesting that you read this week or may have heard in one of your other podcasts that kind of stuck out to you.
Yeah, I did. I did read something I'd send off. We can maybe talk a little bit about this in another episode, a little bit, take a little deeper dive in it, but just give you a kind of a teaser of this. Is one thing lots of people didn't know about Prohibition is, as you might imagine, when Prohibition happened, that you couldn't really get people to stop drinking, so they were making their own liquor and distributing their own liquor. And as I said, I've actually talked to a couple of professors in different disciplines, including a chemist who's willing to come on a little bit later and talk about the chemical compounds of bourbon and how those tastes work, and a couple of economist friends that I have that are experts in Prohibition, and a student who's, as I said, an expert in the Bottled and Bond Act, and we'll talk about that. But at one point in time during Prohibition, government chemists actually poisoned the alcohol to poison their own citizens. So I had reread this again. It's been a while. We can provide a kind of link maybe in the podcast notes to the article, or we can talk about it when we do. I'll provide some reference to it. But there's once upon a time when they wanted people to stop drinking so much they poisoned their own citizens, and that's the U.S. government.
And I'm sure the citizens were doing plenty of poisoning themselves, because once it's not like the entire country is going to give up drinking on a random Tuesday. So you got these people that are used to having their nightly cocktail or a couple cocktails that are either going to have to buy it from Tom down the road that's got a still behind his barn, and I think Tom knows what he's doing, or you try making it yourself, and Lord only knows what you're putting into your body. So not only were people poisoning themselves, just trying to make their own alcohol, But that's crazy to think about, that the government was actually going as far as to also poisoning the alcohol. And it doesn't really ever, I mean, that's the first I've ever heard of it, was when you sent me that article. No one ever really talks about it. It's another one of those things that's kind of swept under the rug, but that's pretty wild, getting it from both sides.
But yeah, there's a lot of deep, dark secrets in about prohibition in this country. Lots of deep, dark secrets. So it's a very interesting time. It should be fun to have a couple of conversations about that, including, I'll give you a little hint, during the Great Depression. One of the reasons why bourbon has to be in new charred oak barrels is that the U.S. lumber industry was worried about losing business. So they lobbied the federal government. So we'll talk about that one as well. So there's a whole bunch of things that in what we call public choice economics that we can add to the story of bourbon here.
And I think that there's at least a couple episodes worth of just the history of, obviously, the Prohibition era, and how bourbon kind of continued through that. I know that there was at least one distillery that continued producing alcohol throughout Prohibition. I believe it was Buffalo Trace.
I think there were. I think there were. We'll have to look at that. I think there were 5, Drew. We'll have to look at the numbers exactly, because we can look this up and how many were left. And for you Southerners, you may have heard the phrase that, Pappy's got his walking medicine, which meant that hip flask that he carried of his liquor. And it was called walking medicine because during Prohibition, those people that got to continue to produce were producing it for medicinal purposes. And a doctor could prescribe up to 1 pint of whiskey a day for his patients.
That's the kind of medicine that I would like to get from my doctor whenever I show up and have a toothache or an earache or whatever. And he goes, well, if you just drink a flask of whiskey a day, it'll take all your troubles away. It helps, I'm sure. But I don't think it does anything medicinally. And I'm just getting it from the class here that it looks like 6 distilleries were able to stay open throughout Prohibition. So we can always dive a little bit deeper into that once we go into the history of bourbon and the history of the Prohibition and things like that. But I know one thing we definitely wanted to do before we leave today. Go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, we promised a Freddie story. I think that's where you're going. But I also forgot, the Scout's not the only one searching for bourbon for me. If you're on the YouTube channel here, I got 3 bottles back, 2 bottles a friend of mine brought back from Memphis from Old Dominic's, and then God bless, some places can ship bourbon and ship liquor into Virginia, because Virginia's not real fond of that. But I managed to get myself a barrel New Year 24, which has some pretty good hype on it too. So those are a couple other we'll talk about in the future. So I guess we owe him a Freddie story.
Very nice. We do, yeah. You kind of teased that last week. You're going to talk about Mr. Freddie Johnson from Buffalo Trace. So I'll let you kind of take it away and tell the viewers about our experience we had at Buffalo Trace and how it was special for us.
Yeah, we were on that tour we called last week the Boomer and 5 Millennials run roughshod over the countryside of Kentucky. And as Buffalo Trace, if you've ever tried to tour distilleries now, the minute Buffalo Trace distillery tours become available, they're gone. And so we went over to the Buffalo Trace distillery anyway, and I walked in and said, hey, do you have any tours? Has anybody canceled? And the guy said, no, we don't, but we have a tasting available in 15 minutes. And I said, okay, we'll take it. I made a quick phone call to the scout here who was bringing up the rear. And he said, yeah, we'll be there in 5 minutes. And I said, well, you got to hurry. We're in 15. And the guy says, oh, and the tasting is with Freddie. I was like, no way. You want to talk about luck? For you guys, for people who don't know, and I think people do, if you watch the documentary Neat, Freddie is featured prominently in the documentary Neat. So we went into the tasting with Freddie and we tried the different Buffalo Trace products and had the standard tasting. And we will have a lesson on tasting bourbon from all the different places we've learned about it from and get you to appreciate it a little bit more. But when the tasting was over, we kind of decided, hey, we're all walking out the same door. Why don't we have a conversation with Freddie? and see if we can get his autograph on the little tasting tray. And I don't think you can see it here, but the way up here on the top is a frame of the tasting tray, and we got it signed by Freddie. I think the scouts got one right behind him. And we got Freddie to sign the autograph, and we started talking to him. And so Freddie started to tell a story, told a story he told in the Neat documentary, but it was amazing to sit there and listen to him tell it to us. So if you haven't seen the Neat documentary, if you have seen it, you've heard the story, but Freddie tells a story. He's a third generation worker at Buffalo Trace. When he graduated from college, he went off to Atlanta to work, I believe, as a chemist. Is that right? And he went off to Atlanta to work.
He was an engineer of some kind.
Engineer? Okay. And so anyway, he went off to Atlanta to work, and made a promise to his father he would come back and work for the distillery at some point. So he was telling a story. He went back and was working for the distillery, and Julian Van Winkle gave him a bottle of Pappy Van Winkle 23-year-old for being a third-generation worker. And he had his father and some other people over at his house one day, and he hadn't broken out the bottle yet that he'd been gifted by Julian.
Which is a very sought-after bottle, right?
Yeah, it is the unicorn.
Just for people who don't know, that's extremely sought after.
Yeah, that is the unicorn of unicorns when it comes to
correct.
And it's subject of the great heist of 2012, I think it was, or 2014. We can talk about that one day too, because people are forgotten about that. But so he opens up, he sits down with his father. I think it's in a late birthday. His father's very old, and it's at his birthday, and they're sitting around the table, and he pulls out the bottle, and Freddie's telling us this story. We're all kind of standing around Freddie, and he's telling us the story. None of us who've heard it before, because we hadn't seen the Neat documentary. So it's kind of organic, and he's telling the story, and he says, well, we sit down, and I open up the bottle, and he goes, Dad, Julian gave us his bottle. We should share this. He pours it around a little bit for everybody, takes the top off, opens it, pours it, puts the cover back on, puts the bottle on the table. And they go, and he goes to say cheers or to his father or whatever, and his dad goes, he goes, what are you doing? And Fred looks at him. He goes, well, we're toasting you on your birthday. He goes, oh, I know what we're doing. And like, I'm getting goosebumps right now telling the story, by the way. I'm not lying. Like, if you could see in the camera, like hairs are standing on end. He says, no, I know what we're doing. I'm asking you, what are you doing? He said, what do you mean? He goes, you poured us all this bourbon, and then you put the top back on it, and you told us, no, that's it, no more for any of you. When you put the top back on the bottle of the bourbon after you pour it for your guests, you're telling them they can't have any more. He goes, why'd you put the top back in the bottle? He said, well, Dad, so maybe we'll have it later. Maybe the next time we do this. He goes, whatever his age was, I'm such and such years old. He goes, I might not be here again. He goes, son, if you're going to open a bottle of bourbon, take the top off, lay it down on the table, pour the bourbon, and you invite your guests to have some more of your bourbon. If you didn't want them to have the bourbon, why'd you open it for them in the first place? And I'm like, tears are streaming down my eyes. I'm like, I want to hug Fred. I'm like, I can't. I'm sniffling. The millennials are all laughing at me, and I'm like, goosebumps. And so one of the things I said going forward, and I kind of knew it but couldn't articulate it, is if you watch our silly TikTok, every time we make a TikTok and we take the bottle, we bang the cork on the shelf, and so you can follow us at Professor.Bourbon on TikTok, and that's a nod to Freddie. If you come to my library and I open a bottle, the bottle's going to stay open as long as you want to drink it, because I wouldn't invite you to my house. I wouldn't invite you to the library to peruse the card catalog and do some research and sip some bourbon if I didn't want you in here, which means that any bottle that's here is available to everybody. So you can see our theory, and comes from Freddie. Freddie articulated it, but we kind of had it is, there's no reason to keep a bottle of bourbon closed. What's the special occasion? We got the bourbon and friends are with us. So let's open the bottle, sit down, and drink the bourbon. And that story still gives me goosebumps to this day when I tell it. And that's one of those stories I don't think I'll ever forget. And we got really lucky. We just showed up at Buffalo Trace, said, "You got a tasting with Freddie." And we were happy enough about that.
Right. And if I'm not mistaken,
Right.
when his dad told him, you don't know how long you'll have to enjoy these bottles. Let's sit here and enjoy it together. And, I think he said they drank almost a whole bottle sitting there over several hours. And then he goes on to say that his dad and his brother were gone, I think within a matter of months or maybe a year or something like that.
Yeah. So it was heart rending. And I think we gave him a hug. I can't remember, but in my mind, we gave him a hug.
I think we all gave him a hug.
I think in my mind, we gave him a hug.
Yeah, we did.
And it's my story, and I'm sticking to it. And it was the most moving experience.
One of my favorites, yeah.
Yeah, it was one of the most moving experiences I've had, and it's something I'll never forget, and it's something that I'll carry with me, and for anybody who ever comes to the library, and it'll be the same thing. So, I think we probably overextended our welcome today, because I know I'm getting to the bottom of what I've been sipping, and you're getting to the bottom of what you've been sipping. So that's probably a pretty good indication that we've carried on way too long. And so I want to thank all the listeners for listening to us. Please like, subscribe, and all those sorts of things to move us up in the algorithm, so to speak. And we've given you a bunch of stuff we might talk about in the future. There's going to be lots of education. We'll do a sipping class. We'll do how to drink bourbon. We'll talk about bottled and bond. We'll talk about, why the oak barrels. We'll talk about how the government tried to kill people. We'll talk about history of bourbon, where the name come from. We got all sorts of things. We'll bring on a chemist. We'll bring on some economists, and above all, we'll sip bourbon. So, anything you got to say? Does the class have any questions, or before the bell rings?
I think we're clear from the class right now. Just be sure that you, like you said, follow us on Instagram and TikTok, professor.bourbon. So yeah, if you could go give us a like, a follow, anything kind of helps us. So looking forward to the next episode and what we got going on in the future.
Class dismissed. Until then, sip bourbon. That's a damn B+. That wasn't a complete shit show.